The market in the desert town was loud and hot. Voices shouted in many languages, bargaining over food, tools, and scraps of metal. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and smoke from cooking fires. Merchants waved their hands, calling customers too. Their stalls, children ran between legs, chasing each other with laughter. But in the middle of the noise and movement, one figure stood completely still. She was small and thin. Her skin pale under a layer of dirt. Her hair hung in tangled strands over her face. Hiding her eyes, her clothes were torn and too big for her. Hanging off her like rags, her bare feet were cracked from the rough ground. She stood beside an empty wall, away from the shade, letting the sun burn her shoulders. No one stopped to help her. Some glanced at her and looked away. Others frowned as if her presence was an annoyance. To them, she was nothing. An unclaimed alien girl, without family, without worth, in this place. That meant she had no rights, no safety, and no food unless someone decided to give it. And no one did. A group of alien men noticed her. They were rough-looking with heavy boots and weapons at their belts. They walked towards her slowly, grinning in a way that made her step back. One of them said something in a language she didn't understand, but his tone was mocking. Another reached out and touched the side of her face with the back of his hand. She flinched, pressing herself against the wall. They laughed, moving closer to block her escape. Her heart pounded, and her breath came in short gasps. She knew. What happened to girls who were caught alone in this market? She thought of running, but the alley was blocked. Then a shadow fell across them. The laughter stopped. The men turned to see a tall figure standing only a few steps away. It was a human man. His clothes were dusty from travel, but his posture was straight. A long coat hung from his shoulders, and his hands rested calmly at his sides. He didn't look angry, but there was something in his eyes that made the men hesitate. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the ones who came here were either desperate or dangerous. The human spoke, his voice steady but low. "She's coming with me," he said. The men looked at each other, unsure if they wanted to argue. One tried to laugh and said the girl was free to take, but his tone was less certain now. The human stepped forward slowly, his shadow covering the girl completely. He didn't raise his voice, but every word sounded final. "You don't touch her again," he said. The air seemed heavier, and the market noise around them faded. The men muttered something under their breath and backed away. They didn't turn their backs until they were several meters away. Then they disappeared into the crowd. The girl stayed pressed against the wall. Her body shook as she looked at the human. She didn't know if she could trust him, but he hadn't hurt her, and he had made the others leave. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. "What's your name?" he asked. She shook her head. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head again. He glanced at her bare feet and torn clothes. Without another word, he took off his coat and placed it gently over her shoulders. The weight of it was warm and strange. No one had given her anything in a long time. He stood and offered his hand. She hesitated, her thin fingers twitching as if they wanted to move but didn't know how. Finally, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but not painful. He began to lead her through the crowd. People stared, some in curiosity, others in disapproval. It didn't matter to him. They left the market and walked down a quiet path towards the edge of the settlement. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows. The girl stayed close to him, still silent but no longer shaking. When they reached a small, weathered building, he stopped. "This is where I stay," he said. He opened the door and stepped aside so she could enter. Inside, it was simple. A bed, a table, some tools and supplies. It smelled of metal and desert air. He poured water into a cup and handed it to her. She drank it quickly, the water running down her chin. He gave her more until her thirst was gone. Then he found a folded blanket and placed it on the bed. "You can rest here," he said. She stood by the bed, unsure if it was really for her, but when he nodded, she sat down slowly. The blanket felt softer than anything she had touched in years. That night, as the desert wind howled outside, the human stayed near the door. The girl lay on the bed, watching him with cautious eyes. She didn't know why he had helped her, and he didn't know yet what trouble she carried with her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a little less alone, and for him. The night felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. The desert night was cold. Wind whistled through the cracks in the small building, carrying fine sand with it. The human sat at the table, a dim lamp casting soft light across the room. The girl sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her hands gripped the fabric tightly, as if afraid someone would take it away. She watched him in silence, her large eyes following his movements. He poured himself a cup of tea from a small metal pot. For a moment, he considered offering her some, but he could see she was still tense. Instead, he pushed a plate toward her: bread, some dried fruit, and a small piece of cooked meat. She stared at the food, then looked up at him. "It's for you," he said, his voice calm. She reached out slowly, taking the bread first. Her hands trembled as she lifted it to her mouth. She ate in small bites at first, then faster, as if afraid the food might vanish. He didn't interrupt her. He remembered seeing people like her in war zones, starving, frightened, unsure. If kindness was real, when she was done, she set the plate down and kept her eyes lowered. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. He tried again. "Do you have family?" Her fingers curled into the blanket. Finally, she shook her head. The human leaned back in his chair, not pushing her for more. He knew trust was not given easily. It would take time outside. The wind grew louder, rattling the thin metal door. The girl looked toward it, her shoulders tightening. "You're safe here," he said. She glanced at him, as if testing the truth of his words. After a pause, she whispered something. He leaned forward to hear. "They will come," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. His brow furrowed. "Who?" She shook her head again, as if saying the name would make them appear. Later, when the lamp was out and the room was dark, he lay on the floor near the door. The girl lay on the bed, her breathing slow but not yet deep with sleep. He could feel her fear in the air. It wasn't just the fear of being alone. It was the fear of being found. He didn't know who she had run from, but he was starting to understand that trouble might follow her to his door. In the middle of the night, a sound woke him. It wasn't the wind, it was softer. Like footsteps on sand, he sat up silently, listening. The steps stopped just outside the door. The girl's eyes opened in the dark, her body stiffening. She had heard it too. The human reached for the small weapon by his side. He moved to the door and listened again. No knock, no voice, just the faint scrape of something against the wall. Then silence. He waited a long time before sitting back down. The girl was still watching him, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak. But she stayed quiet. When dawn came, the wind died down. He stepped outside to check the surroundings around the edges of the building. He saw them, footprints, not human, not hers. They were wider, with claw marks at the front. Whoever had come in the night had not been alone when he came back inside. The girl was sitting up. She looked at him and then at the door. "They know," she said. His jaw tightened. "Know what?" "That I'm here," she answered. The human sat on the edge of the table, studying her. "You need to tell me everything," he said. She shook her head, fear flashing in her eyes. "If I tell you, you will send me away," she whispered. He frowned. "I don't send people away because they're in trouble," said. Something in his voice made her believe him just enough to speak. She told him in broken words about the gang, men who took what they wanted. They had claimed her as theirs after finding her alone in the desert. They made her work, watch, and listen, until one night she saw something she wasn't supposed to. Something they would kill to keep secret. She had run, carrying nothing. But the clothes on her back, her voice trembled when she said, "They will not stop until I am dead." The human listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said only one thing: "They'll have to get through me first." For the first time, her eyes softened. It wasn't trust yet, but it was close. She looked down at the blanket and pulled it tighter around herself. Outside, the sun was rising, the desert glowing gold. Inside, a new tension filled the air. The human knew they wouldn't have much time before the gang came looking again. And the girl knew she had just tied her fate to his, whether either of them wanted it or not. By midday, the heat of the desert pressed down like a heavy blanket. The human had spent the morning repairing a loose panel on the side of the building, but his eyes kept scanning the horizon. The girl stayed inside, sitting near the window. She didn't speak, but her gaze never left the dusty road leading into the settlement. Every shadow made her tense. Every distant shape made her grip the blanket tighter. The human finally stepped inside and crouched beside her. "You'll be safe here," he said again. She didn't answer, only pressed her lips together. He noticed her hands were shaking. "You've been running a long time," he added. That made her glance at him, but she didn't speak. He could see the fear in her eyes. The kind of fear that came from knowing your enemies would never stop. In the afternoon, he decided to check the area beyond the settlement. The sun burned overhead. As he walked the dry paths, it was quiet, almost too quiet. When he reached a ridge of rock, he stopped below. In the distance, he saw movement. 3 figures on long, mechanical desert bikes were cutting across the sand, heading toward the settlement. Even at this distance, he could see the shape of their weapons strapped to their backs, and the way they scanned the land told him exactly what they were. Hunters. He stayed low, watching as they slowed near the settlement's edge. They spoke briefly to a merchant, showing him something, perhaps a picture or a description. The merchant pointed toward the road, the one leading closer to his building. The human's jaw tightened. They were looking for her, and they were close. He returned to the building quickly, but without running. Inside, the girl looked up, reading his expression instantly. "They're here," she whispered. Her voice was almost too soft to hear, but the words carried weight. He nodded once. "I saw 3 of them," he said, "on bikes, armed." She swallowed hard. "It's them," she said, her voice breaking. "They don't come alone." He moved to a storage chest in the corner and began pulling out supplies. A canteen, a small pack of dried food, a short-bladed weapon. He handed her a scarf and a hood. "Put these on," he told her. She hesitated. "If we leave, they will follow." She said, "If we stay, they will find us." He replied, her eyes darted to the window, where the desert shimmered under the heat. For a moment, she seemed frozen between fear and the unknown. Then she pulled the scarf over her head, hiding her face. They stepped outside, keeping to the back paths that wound between half-collapsed buildings. The human moved quickly but carefully. Avoiding open areas, he could hear faint sounds from the settlement, raised voices. The hum of bike engines. Once, they ducked behind a crumbling wall as 2 hunters passed less than 10 meters away. The girl held her breath, every muscle in her body tense when they were gone. The human touched her shoulder. "Move," he whispered. They slipped into the narrow alley and kept going. By the time they reached the far edge of the settlement, the sun was beginning to fall. The light turned gold, casting long shadows across the sand. They made for the dry riverbed that ran along the base of a low cliff. From there, they could travel unseen for a while. But just as they were about to drop into the riverbed, a voice called out, "Human." They both turned. One of the hunters stood on the ridge above them, weapon in hand. Behind him, the other 2 appeared, blocking the way back. The human stepped slightly in front of the girl, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "You've got the wrong person," he said evenly. The lead hunter laughed. "Small, pale, ragged. That's her," he said, pointing at the girl. "She's coming with us." The human didn't move. "She's not going anywhere with you," he replied. The hunters spread out slowly, their steps confident. They were used to people being afraid. But the human didn't back away. The girl clutched his coat, whispering, "Please." Her voice shook, but her eyes were fixed on the hunters like someone watching a nightmare come alive. The lead hunter stepped closer. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered. The human didn't answer. Instead, he glanced to the side, noting the loose rocks on the ridge, the sharp drop into the riverbed. He shifted his stance just enough to be ready. Then, in a single motion, he grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her toward the edge. "Jump," he ordered, before the hunters could fire. They leaped down into the dry riverbed, sand and dust exploding around them. The hunters shouted, the sound of boots hitting rock close behind. The human kept moving, pulling the girl along as they ran. Under the shadow of the cliff, he knew they couldn't outrun bikes forever. They needed somewhere the hunters wouldn't dare to follow, somewhere dangerous. He glanced ahead and saw it. The broken ruins half buried in sand. The place locals called forbidden, *. The broken ruins rose from the sand like the bones of a giant creature. Jagged stone walls leaned at odd angles, half-buried towers jutted from the dunes, and shadows clung to every gap. The human pulled the girl toward them, their feet sliding on the loose sand behind them. Shouts echoed in the riverbed as the hunters followed. The sound of their boots and weapons grew closer. The girl stumbled once, but the human caught her and kept her moving. "You have to keep going," he said, his voice steady, even though his own breath was heavy when they reached the edge of the ruins. The air felt cooler. The stones blocked some of the desert sun, and a faint wind whispered through the cracks. The girl looked up at the dark shapes around them. "They won't." "Come here," she whispered. The human glanced at her. "Why not?" "They think it's cursed," she said, her voice trembling. "They say anyone who enters never comes out." He didn't answer. He only kept moving. Guiding her deeper between the crumbling walls, the ruins were silent, except for the crunch of sand under their boots. Strange carvings lined some of the walls, spirals, symbols and shapes that seemed to shift when the light hit them. The human's eyes scanned for danger. Every step they took seemed to echo, even though there was no one in sight. He knew the hunters wouldn't stop at superstition. If they thought the girl was here, they would enter, curse or no curse. The path between the stones narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. The girl stayed close, her hand gripping the back of his coat. She whispered, "I used to hear stories about this place." "Stories?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. She nodded. "They said it was built by my people before the desert swallowed everything." He could hear the sadness in her voice. Like the ruins, she was a remnant of something almost lost. A sudden sound made him stop. It wasn't the hunters. It was a deep, slow rumble. Small stones rolled from the wall beside them. The girl froze, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she asked. Before he could answer, the rumble came again, louder this time. The human guided her forward quickly, deciding it was better to be deeper inside than out in the open. They found an arched doorway leading into a dark chamber inside. The air was cooler still, and the walls glowed faintly with light from thin cracks above. In the center of the chamber was something unexpected, a raised stone platform with an object resting on it. It was a crystal, small but bright, its pale blue light pulsing slowly. The girl stopped in her tracks, her breath caught. "That's?" she whispered, but didn't finish. Her hand lifted slightly, as if she wanted to touch it. The human glanced at her. "You know what it is?" She nodded. "It's the reason they're chasing me," she said, her voice shaking. Before he could ask more, Voices echoed from the entrance they had just used. The hunters had followed them. The human grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her to the side. Slipping behind a fallen slab of stone, the hunter's footsteps grew louder. The sound of metal on stone ringing through the chamber. "They're here," she whispered. He looked at the crystal, then at her. "Can you carry it?" he asked. She hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward and lifting it from the platform. The light in the chamber seemed to brighten when she touched it. The hunters shouted, their steps quickening. "Go." The human said. They darted through another opening at the far end of the chamber. The passage was narrow, forcing them to squeeze through in places. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the rumble returned, this time stronger, something deep. Beneath the ruins was waking. They emerged into a wide courtyard open to the sky. Half the ground had collapsed into a pit, revealing more ruins below, without hesitation. The human led her toward a sloping path down into the lower level. If they stayed above, they'd be trapped, below, at least. They had a chance to lose the hunters. The girl moved quickly, despite the crystal in her arms. Her eyes darted constantly to the shadows, as if she expected something other than the hunters. To be here, at the bottom of the slope. They found another archway leading into a long hallway. The air here was cooler still, and the faint glow from the crystal lit their way. The walls were covered in more of the shifting carvings. The girl glanced at them and whispered something in her language. The human didn't understand, but the way she said it sounded like both fear and reverence. They moved deeper until they found a small side chamber. The human checked it quickly. One entrance. No signs of movement. He motioned for her to sit. They both caught their breath in the dim light. Finally, he asked, "Why is that crystal so important?" She looked down at it, her fingers tightening. "It's not just a crystal," she said softly. "It's the heart of my people's last city." Her voice wavered. "They destroyed the city to take it. And I was the only one left who knew. Where they hid it, the humans stared at her, and now they know you have it," he said. She nodded slowly. "They will never stop, somewhere above." The hunters' voices echoed again, fainter now, but still searching. The human's jaw tightened. "Then we'll just have to go where they can't follow," he said. The girl looked at him. "Where is that?" she asked. He glanced toward the deeper tunnels beyond the chamber, further into the wastes, he replied. The crystal's light glowed brighter, as if agreeing with him. The tunnels beneath the ruins were colder than the desert night. The air was heavy, carrying a faint metallic scent. The crystal in the girl's hands glowed steadily, casting pale blue light along the walls. The shifting carvings seemed to move. When that light touched them, the human kept his weapon ready as they walked, every sound echoing far too loudly. His footsteps and hers blended into a single rhythm. The only sign they were still moving deeper into the earth. They passed broken archways and collapsed corridors. Once, they stopped when they heard a distant rumble. Like stone grinding against stone, the girl's grip on the crystal tightened. She whispered, "It's awake." The human looked at her sharply. "What's awake?" She didn't answer, only kept walking. Her eyes were fixed ahead, as if she could see something far beyond the walls. The hallway opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling was high, supported by towering stone pillars. At the center stood a structure that looked almost like a throne, but carved from the same rock as the floor. Around it were strange machines, their surfaces covered in dust, their shapes unfamiliar. The human's eyes scanned the room for movement. It felt too quiet, too still. The girl stepped forward slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. "This is the place my people called the Heart Room," she said softly, "long ago. The crystal was kept here." She placed the crystal into a shallow groove in the throne-like structure. The moment it touched the stone, the entire chamber lit up with blue lines racing along the walls and pillars. The carving shifted fully now, showing shapes that looked like cities, rivers, and stars. The humans stared. Realizing they were looking at some kind of map, the girl's voice trembled as she said, "This was our world." Before it turned to sand, her hand touched one glowing symbol, a mark deep in the center of the map. "This is where we were safe," she said. But when the invaders came, they took the crystal and destroyed everything. The human studied her expression. He saw the weight of years in her eyes, not her own years, but the years of her people's suffering. "Why is the crystal so important?" he asked. She turned to him. "It is the key," she said. "It can restore what was lost, or destroy what remains." Her voice echoed in the vast chamber. "That is why they hunt me. They cannot let anyone use it against them." Before he could speak, a sound broke the stillness. Footsteps. They came from the far entrance of the chamber, heavy and deliberate. The human's hand went to his weapon instantly. The girl stepped back toward the throne, her eyes wide, from the shadows. The three hunters emerged, their weapons raised. "Well," the leader said with a cruel smile, "you've saved us the trouble of searching." The human moved in front of the girl, blocking her from their view. "Leave now," he said, his voice cold. The leader laughed. "You're far from your kind, human," he sneered. "Do you even know what you're protecting?" The human didn't answer. The leader took a step forward. "She's not worth dying for," he said. "She's just a piece of property that ran away." The girl's fingers tightened around the crystal again. She looked at the human, her lips trembling. He glanced back at her and spoke without looking away from the hunters. "She's not property," he said. The hunters raised their weapons. In that moment, the human made his choice. He fired first. A warning shot that struck the stone near the leader's feet, sending shards flying. The echo filled the chamber, and the blue light of the walls made every shadow sharp. The hunters took cover behind the pillars, returning fire. Bolts of energy struck the walls, making the carvings flare brighter for an instant. The human ducked behind another pillar, moving fast. He returned fire, forcing them to stay low. Meanwhile, the girl crouched by the throne, whispering in her own language. The crystal's light pulsed faster, as if responding to her words. A low hum began to fill the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. One hunter broke from cover, trying to flank them. The human saw the movement and took him down with a precise shot to his weapon, sending it clattering across the floor. The hunter cursed and stumbled back. The leader shouted something in anger, but before he could fire again, the throne erupted with light. The hum became a deep, resonating tone, shaking dust from the ceiling. The girl stood now, holding the crystal high. The blue light wrapped around her like a shield. Her voice rang out, no longer trembling. "This place remembers me," she said. The hunters hesitated, their eyes narrowing. The leader stepped back, for the first time unsure. The human moved closer to the girl. His weapon still ready? "What are you doing?" he asked quickly. "Calling for the ruins to protect us," she said, as if in answer. The pillars began to shift, the carvings sliding and twisting into new shapes. Stone panels rose from the floor, forming barriers between them and the hunters. The hunters fired, but the shots hit solid rock. The girl lowered the crystal slightly. Her breathing fast. "This won't hold them for long," she said. The human nodded. "Then we move now," he replied. They slipped through a narrow passage that had opened behind the throne, the blue light guiding them as they disappeared into the darkness beyond. The sound of the hunters' frustrated shouts echoed through the chamber. The narrow passage twisted like a snake beneath the ruins. The walls pressed close on either side, and the air was thick with dust. The faint blue glow from the crystal was the only light. The girl moved ahead, her steps quick but careful. The human stayed close behind, watching for any sign of pursuit far behind them. The hunters' voices still echoed, though fainter now, but he knew they would not give up. The passage opened into a wide, circular hall. The floor was smooth stone. The ceiling high enough that the shadows seemed endless above. In the center stood a strange device, a ring of metal set into the floor. Its surface covered in those shifting carvings. The girl stopped in front of it, her eyes widening. "This is a gate," she said softly. The human frowned. "A gate to where?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know." But it was built to defend the heart room. They didn't have time to study it. A sudden clatter of footsteps came from the passage they had just used. The human glanced around, looking for another way out. There was none the hunters had found. Then, 3 shapes emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. The leader smiled darkly. "You've run far enough," he said. "Hand her over, and maybe I'll let you live." The human stepped between the girl and the hunters. His voice was calm but hard. "You'll have to go through me." The leader's smile widened. "That was the plan," he replied. The hunters spread out slowly. Trying to corner them, the human took aim, firing a shot that forced one of them behind a pillar. The sound echoed through the hall. The girl's grip tightened on the crystal. She looked at the strange ring of metal in the floor. "It can help us," she whispered. "How?" He asked quickly. "If I place the crystal in the center, it will activate," she said. The human glanced at the hunters who were closing in. "Then do it fast," he told her. She dropped to her knees beside the ring. The carvings seemed to ripple under her touch. The crystal's light grew brighter, pulsing in time with the sound of her voice as she spoke in her language. The hunters realized what she was doing. The leader shouted, "Stop her!" and fired. The human moved, taking the shot to his shoulder. The impact forcing him back a step. Pain shot through him. But he stayed standing. He returned fire, driving the hunters back for a moment. "Keep going." He called to her. The floor beneath the ring began to vibrate. Blue light spilled from the carvings, spreading outward in a web of glowing lines. The hunters tried to push forward again, but the ground beneath them cracked. From the cracks, pillars of light rose, forming a circle around the device. The girl's voice grew stronger, her fear replaced by something fiercer. The human could feel the air shift heavy. Charged, alive, one of the hunters made a desperate dash toward her. The human intercepted him, slamming him into the wall with his uninjured arm. The hunter dropped his weapon, and the human kicked it away. The leader fired again, the shot striking the stone beside the girl. The sound of her voice didn't falter. The ring in the floor spun slowly now, the blue light blazing so bright it hurt to look at. Then, with a deep, resonating hum, the device came fully alive. The light shot upward in a column, striking the high ceiling and filling the hall with an almost blinding glow. The hunters shielded their eyes, stumbling back. The human stepped to the girl's side, keeping his weapon trained on them. "What now?" he asked her. She looked at him, the glow of the crystal reflecting in her eyes. "Now, it fights for us," she said. From the light, shapes began to emerge, not solid, but shimmering like heat on the horizon. They looked like warriors, tall and armored, their forms made of pure energy. The hunters froze, their confidence faltering. The leader took a step back, his voice uncertain for the first time. "This isn't possible," he muttered. The human allowed himself the smallest of grim smiles. "Looks possible to me," he said. The energy warriors moved forward, their steps silent but unstoppable. The hunters fired at them, but the bolts passed harmlessly through. The warriors swung their glowing weapons, forcing the hunters to retreat toward the passage. The leader fired one last shot toward the girl, but the human deflected it, the bolts scorching the floor within moments. The hunters were driven back into the darkness, their shouts fading as they fled. The glow of the warriors began to fade too, their forms dissolving into streams of light that sank back into the carvings. The ring slowed its spin, the hum lowering to a soft vibration. The girl knelt there, breathing hard, her hands still clutching the crystal.
Ace.
The human crouched beside her, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We did it," she replied. He helped her to her feet. The hall was quiet again, but it felt different now. Not empty, but watchful. The girl looked toward the deeper shadows ahead. "They'll come back," she said. The human nodded. "Then we'll be ready," he replied, and together they stepped forward, leaving the gate behind, deeper into the heart of the forbidden ruins. The air in the deepest part of the ruins felt different. It was cooler, calmer, and carried the faint scent of something old, not decay. But history, the human and the girl walked side by side, their footsteps soft against the worn stone. The glow from the crystal was steady now, no longer pulsing in alarm. For a while, they didn't speak. They both knew the silence wouldn't last. The hunters had been driven away, but not destroyed. They found a narrow tunnel leading upward. The girl touched the wall as she walked, her fingers tracing the carvings. "These halls are all that's left of my people's greatness." She whispered. The human glanced at her. "You kept that greatness alive," he said. She shook her head slowly. "I only survived." "You're the one who fought for me." He didn't answer, but the faint smile on his face said enough. When they emerged from the tunnel, the ruins opened into a wide terrace. From here, the desert stretched endlessly, the sun low on the horizon. Painting the sand gold, the wind swept over them, carrying the dry heat of the day and the cooler breath of evening. The girl stepped forward to the edge, her eyes scanning the empty land. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He joined her, resting a hand on the worn stone railing. "It's free," he replied. The moment didn't last. A sound rose from below, the low hum of engines. The human's eyes narrowed, far in the distance. Specks moved across the sand. Growing larger with every second, the hunters had returned. And this time, they weren't alone. At least a dozen riders were coming, their bikes kicking up clouds of dust. The girl turned to him. "They'll never stop," she said, her voice tight. He looked at her for a long moment. "Then we make sure they can't follow," he replied. They retreated back into the ruins, the human scanning every corridor they passed. He was looking for something, an advantage, a trap, anything they could use. The girl kept pace, clutching the crystal to her chest. Finally, they came to a wide chamber with two massive stone doors carved into the wall. The girl's eyes widened. "This is the sealing hall," she said. "When it closes, no one can enter for 1,000 years." The human studied the doors. "Can you activate it?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. But if we close it from the inside, we'll be trapped too." The sound of engines was closer now, echoing faintly through the ruins. The human took a deep breath. "Do it," he said. She looked at him in shock. "We'll never get out," she whispered. "We'll find another way," he said firmly. "But they don't get to take you back." She stepped to the center of the chamber, placing the crystal into a pedestal carved with the same shifting symbols. Light burst from the stone, racing along the floor toward the great doors. The ground trembled as the ancient mechanism began to move. Dust fell from the ceiling as the doors started to slide shut, their grinding echo filling the chamber. The hunters burst in through the far archway, shouting. The human raised his weapon, firing to hold them back. Bolts of energy struck the stone walls, filling the air with flashes of light. One hunter managed to get close, swinging a blade. The human caught the strike on his forearm, shoving the man back. The girl's voice rose as she spoke the words to seal the gate. The crystal's glow flared brighter than the setting sun. The lead hunter pushed forward through the chaos, his eyes locked on the girl. He shouted her name like it was a curse. The human stepped into his path, blocking him completely. "You've lost," he said coldly. The hunter swung his weapon, but the human caught his wrist and twisted, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. A single hard strike sent the man stumbling back toward the others. The doors were nearly shut now. Only a narrow gap remaining, the hunters made one last desperate rush. The human fired, the shots forcing them to dive for cover. Then, with a final heavy crash, the stone doors closed completely. The sound echoed like thunder, and then there was silence. Only the slow hum of the crystal remained. The girl fell to her knees, clutching the crystal. Her breath came fast. Her eyes wide. "It's done," she whispered. "They can't reach us." The human lowered his weapon. Wincing at the ache in his shoulder, he walked over to her. "You're free now," he said. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. "No, we're both free." They stood there in the quiet hall for a long moment. The light from the crystal painted their faces in shades of blue. Outside the sealed doors, the hunters could scream and rage all they wanted. But in here, in the ancient safety of her people's ruins, they were untouchable later. They found a smaller exit, a narrow passage that wound upward to the desert above. The night had fallen by the time they stepped outside, the stars blazing across the sky. The girl turned to him. "Where will we go now?" she asked. He looked out at the endless desert, then at her. "Anywhere you want," he said. She held the crystal close and smiled faintly for the first time. "I get to choose." They began walking into the night, their shadows stretching long behind them. The desert wind carried their footprints away. But their path forward was clear. Somewhere far ahead lay a new life, one without chains, and together they walked toward it, leaving the past buried behind the sealed stone.